I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my longtime friend Jonathon Nguyen from Fortinet. And we're going to have a nice discussion about network security and SASE and a lot of other concepts that people have been using to improve the network security of their infrastructure. So, Jonathon, how are you doing?
Great, Ed. It's always great to spend time with you.
Now we're filming this sort of in the latter portion of 2020, so COVID is still going on. So before we get into tech, I'm curious what you guys at Fortinet have seen from customers kind of
Yeah.
dealing with work from home and just the changes in the way we're all kind of managing through the pandemic.
Yeah, so beginning somewhere about 9 months ago, we began seeing this drive around contactless commerce. I mean, it's really manifested in terms of remote working, more people working outside that hardware-defined enterprise perimeter than ever. In fact, some 92% of us. And that's a big shift. And going forward, I think the analysts in the market space estimate that some 40% of us will have remote working as a standard business model, which changes a lot of things, operational models, business, industrial psychology, all types of things. At the same time, I've seen both governments and private sector companies focus on how do they enable their stakeholders, their customers to interact with their brand and their organizations in a secure, seamless fashion. It's all about making sure that that customer can reach those resources to make that transaction. And I've seen conversations with lots of C levels talk about the business outcome and the customer experience as one. You can't get the mission outcome, the business outcome, unless you have a great customer experience. And along the way, what we've seen is a tremendous amount of interest on the endpoint, on managed detection and response capabilities, on VPNs. At the same time, we're seeing accelerated cloud adoption. Why? Because literally everybody wanted to be a cloud native by March of this year. They were clearly able to see that their peers that were already ahead in their cloud adoption strategies were performing better, and that they were enabling the ability of their stakeholders to access and interact with their brands much more easier. So agility, innovation, time to market, and those forces are not going to go away. And so those are the things that we're seeing today, but the themes, the big macro trends that are going to shape this industry, I think are driven around greater distributed computing, what our founder Ken Xie calls security-driven networking. This notion that security and networking really need to be converged, and security needs to be wherever the compute is. And in fact, I think that's very telling, because if the outcome and the experience is the object of the exercise, well, that means the application performance cannot be disaggregated from the network performance, which cannot be disaggregated from the security component either. And so those are the big macro trends that I'm seeing. So in terms of technology and platforms, I think zero trust is going to be a pillar of how we approach security. And then on the networking and the cloud components, it's going to be around SD-WAN. The reason why SD-WAN is so important is because as we begin to disaggregate and move away from those enterprise perimeters and transform branch offices and remote locations, there's no reason to backhaul all of that traffic back to that data center. You and I, old telco guys, right? And we're talking about, MPLS and that router-based architecture fundamentally changing because compute is so distributed now. And then likewise, as we adopt cloud and SD-WAN, the fall on the adjacency is going to be this secure access service edge concept, or SASE. Yeah.
I mean, is SD-WAN and SASE, is that kind of the network response to zero trust in a sense? Just this idea that you can't run the WAN that you used to. Is that a way of thinking of it, or is that, how do you normally think of that?
I think it's one way of thinking about it. I think all things involving security are going to have zero trust networking principles. And so, zero trust, founded back in 2009, posited the idea that you shouldn't trust traffic inside that hardware-defined perimeter any more than traffic outside that perimeter, right? And that was great and all, but now with 90+% of the stats working outside that perimeter, it's relevant. And so the core concepts are you need to ensure that only the right people or things, entities, are accessing the right applications at the right time. And so that's going to be a core operating principle in cybersecurity moving forward. Now, SD-WAN comes on board. The reason why that's important is software-defined wide area network. It's because we're adopting multi-clouds. We're moving the compute from those private data centers and private clouds increasingly to multiple clouds and hybrid architectures. And so with that comes the question, well, if I'm accessing these services and they're no longer inside the perimeter, Why am I backhauling all of my traffic back to that data center? Why am I spending millions of dollars on router-based MPLS architectures in a hub and spoke model? And so now I think we're fundamentally shifting the conversation. So the center of the universe isn't the data center or the server in a hub and spoke model rating outwards. The model moving forward is a focus on the user or the entity sitting on some LAN, reaching across a wide area network to access resources from multiple clouds and consuming services from the cloud. And that's where SASE comes in, right? This notion that you need to provide security on those edges. Now, at Fortinet, we go one step further, meaning that security should come in multiple form factors. It shouldn't be all from the cloud. But what's clearly evident is that security has to be on the LAN edge, the WAN edge, and the cloud edge, and whether that is in an appliance form factor or a VM or as a cloud delivered capability. So I think what you're seeing is that security enabled with software-defined wide area networking using zero trust principles delivered in that fashion. So yeah, all those things are coming together. And for years we've been talking about things like NOC-SOC integration, right? Holistic approaches on networking and security. Well, now one of the things I'm seeing is that if the object of the exercise is the mission outcome or the business outcome and the end user experience, you can't disaggregate the three. They're all mutually dependent. You can't have a great outcome if the application performance is low. And you may have great application performance, but if you have the wrong networking access methodology, it's for naught, because you're not going to have a great experience. And if it's not secure, all of it's for naught. And so I think what we talk about is that security-driven networking and that convergence of security and networking.
So this concept of edge in enterprise networking used to be easy. It just looked a bunch of firewalls and you could draw the picture. PowerPoint was relatively simple. Talk to me about the role of cloud and network in this new distributed edge. Like the E in SASE is edge, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's like this very distributed, virtual, ragged edge. How do I manage that? People listening want to understand what's my new sort of perimeter, virtual perimeter. How do you deal with that problem now?
So I think one of the things I key on is that even before COVID and digital transformation and contactless commerce were buzzwords, right? We were failing in some systemic issues. I mean, across the years, both you and I have seen it, right? That 80% of all the attacks that lead to breaches and disruptions could have been mitigated through simple to intermediate controls. 99% of all the vulnerabilities exploited were known for at least a year, meaning the patch was available. And so those fundamental issues in complexity and lack of visibility, integration on those edges, right, is what caused those problems to begin with. Now those edges are multiplying. Now we have to worry about not that only the enterprise perimeter, but our wide area network and the multiple clouds that we're in. And so wherever these edges come together, the nexus of the data plane, control plane, the management plane, wherever these sub-networks and networks come together, those are where the gaps can appear. And I think fundamentally the way we look at it is that you have to have an integrated approach that is broad enough to cover that environment from the LAN edge, the WAN edge, to the cloud edge. You have to have it integrated. So you have the visibility and control. And then finally, Ed, you have to have AI, because there's no way that humans can keep pace with the volume, variety, and velocity of the data. So I think moving forward, the way we look at it is we find very strategic partners and we consolidate. That's the other things I'm seeing in the marketplace today, is that the enterprise customers are saying, we've got too many boxes, too many management consoles, too many bases we've got to cover. And we need to find a way to consolidate to get better efficiencies, better accuracy, and enhance acceleration of response. And so moving forward, I see a maturation of the prevention platform, our next generation firewalls, if you will. I see a maturation in the detection platform, the analytics, the SIEM tools, and a maturation of the orchestration and response capabilities. Now, if you can bring all those elements together and integrate that, empower with AI, that's how you could address an environment where you've got edges, multiple edges, and you need to have visibility across all of those elements, right? And so that's why we came up with this Fortinet security fabric, and that's our approach moving forward.
Yeah, when you say power with AI in the maturation of these things, do you mean that you can actually do some, say, autonomous configs and self-learning in the network self-healing? Like,
Yep.
is that possible for the network to become more a living object with machine
Automated
learning
playbook.
based?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The threshold's 10, but we've been doing this for 9.5 years. 10.5 billion node artificial neural networks. We launched a virtual security analyst earlier this year, which in the development phase, we showed there's empirical data that beginning in week 5, the virtual security analyst was outpacing the average human analyst, SOC analyst level 1, 2, or 3, because AI is inherently self-learning and continually self-learning, and humans are average, bad, or indifferent. At week 10, we were able to demonstrate consistently that it was the equivalent of at least 5 human SOC analysts.
Yeah.
And when you do that over time in a self-learning model, you begin to build patterns and you approach that 99.97 level of confidence interval that my statistics professor said that's when it's meaningful, Jonathan. Okay? And as you build on that, you have the ability to leverage that integrated platform to do things like automated playbooks, to identify known vulnerabilities and either to patch them or to ensure that the compensating control in an internally segmented firewall is available to make sure that you cover that base, and to make sure that all that's aligned to those dashboards that tell our leadership teams, here's where we are on our risk management strategy. These are the outstanding vulnerabilities and priorities and criticalities that we have to address. And I think that's going to be the path moving forward. And I think one of the things that I've noticed in the last year has been the rate at which companies are partnering for security. 6 years ago, Ed, the notion of a co-managed SOC was unthinkable. But then we got into cloud, which is all shared responsibility. And now the idea of SOC as a service, SIEM as a service, is really key. It's what you and I have been told since we were growing up, that security is a team sport. It's not a DIY exercise, right? And so from the SMB that's outsourcing their security to a mid-market that's looking at MDR to an enterprise that's looking at incident response and those higher-end threat hunting services, literally everyone is thinking about what's our core competency, right?
It's funny on the automation and intelligence and so on. I think a good analogy, one that has always made sense to me, is humans can't beat computers at chess anymore. They just can't. And in a sense, playing cyber defense has a element of game theoretic decision making to it. Where you're optimizing paths and deciding on the correct rules and deciding what should be allowed or disallowed. It's like a really complicated game of chess in many cases when you're dealing with a live incident. And it just seems pretty obvious to me that given the complexity of that game, the idea that human beings can beat a piece of good technology seems kind of preposterous. Just a matter of getting people comfortable. And then what happens is you orchestrate. It creates, for the human being, a much more enjoyable job and a much more challenging one too, because you're orchestrating the network operations that are.
Well, I'd like us to solve the 80% of issues that are the known knowns, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
It's true.
The fundamentals in hygiene and security controls, assist 20, all of those things that we've been talking about for the last 20 odd years, those things are hobbled us because of the level of complexity, right? Now, if we use integration, automation, orchestration to resolve that, and then focus the humans on the elevated issues, right? When you're dealing with zero trust and you're trying to identify, authenticate, validate, log and monitor everything and discern what's anomalous from malicious across millions of simultaneous sessions, that's going to be a challenge that no security team is ever going to get their arms around. And in fact, when you look at the major data breaches, that you and I have seen this as well, you always see it's usually somebody who missed something or they had the alert but were overloaded, right? And so I think that's why we need to get this security fabric-based approach accelerated. Yeah.
What are some things we can expect from Fortinet in the next year? What are some things that you guys are working on? It seems like every year there's always a lot of fun announcements from the company and at your conferences, which right now I know it was a couple of them, they're all virtual now, but
that's right.
What can we expect for next year?
So I think you're going to see a lot more around that maturation of the prevention, detection, and orchestration platform, really accelerated by AI. You're going to see more on endpoint protection because practical reality is that we're all going to be working remotely, and those home networks are never going to be enterprise class. And so the focus is going to be on that endpoint, whether it's on net or off net. You're going to see more on incident response. You're going to certainly see more in terms of SASE and that enablement of that capability, consolidation of security and SD-WAN, in a number of form factors and consumption patterns. And likewise, I think you're going to see a focus on hyperscale operations as well. And what I mean by that are huge payloads. As we think about contactless commerce and things like healthcare, where you've got all types of confidentiality, regulatory, and compliance issues, but you've got payloads in terms of medical data. You've got X-rays, you've got scans. There are huge volumes, and they're going to have to be supplied and delivered from multiple locations. The average hospital bed in the United States has about 18 to 20 IP-enabled devices. And when we think about delivering that across the board, that's just incredible. And so hyperscale operations is going to be huge as well. And I don't see the death of the private cloud in the data center, because I'm also beginning to see that companies see the limits of public clouds. And there's certain things that they're going to want to do.
Is industrial IoT and industrial control a main driver for hyperscale? Is that one of the bigger drivers?
That's going to be one of them, but I think the other side of the house is going to be the sheer volume of data that's going to be generated.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we're seeing on the immediate horizon is edge-based computing, which is now being enabled by 5G. So digital transformation, where we're trying to accelerate data-driven decision-making, and you have literally millions of SASE, or rather SaaS-enabled devices and entities throughout the infrastructure, on the smart factory floor, in the streets themselves, all these smart city solutions, right, that are all collecting and sharing information, because we're moving from an operating environment where devices were connected based upon telemetry to being networked. And it's going to be, computing is going to be on the edge. So think about this situation. You've got 85% of all the new data and computing will be done on the edge. You still have the same amount of previous computing done in the cloud, but now you've got computing on the edge and in the cloud, and you've got people and entities accessing both. And that's a very distributed operating environment. And I think more than ever, we need to think about a consolidation and integrated approach. Just having multiple platforms, multiple vendors, multiple management consoles, to me, leaves gaps. And those gaps are typically where things that were unintended happen, the unintended consequences of networking decisions, as well as some of the malicious actors. So I think what you'll see at Fortinet is the ability to help manage that complexity through integration automation.
Is the website, Fortinet website, the best place to keep track of things that are going on, new content? I know you and I have written a lot of things together.
Yeah.
I assume the website's the best place for people who want to keep up with what's happening in the company.
It's there. It's at Fortinet.com. You'll find it on Facebook. You'll find it on LinkedIn. There are lots of ways to get information. It's a very dynamic environment right now, but changes are happening.
Well, we'll look forward to a really amazing year from you and from the team at Fortinet in 2021. On behalf of the team here at Tag Cyber and everybody watching, I want to appreciate you. I want to thank you and appreciate your time sharing with us. And
likewise, Ed.
Jonathon, I hope you enjoyed the discussion.
Always, Ed. It's always great to spend time with you.
You bet. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time.